right, so we're 2 weeks ago, I started talking about Genesis 1 through 3, marathon session. I covered a lot of things. Hopefully it was beneficial. And so, yeah, one of the things we talked about is that the Old Testament is kind of weird for modern readers, and especially if you didn't grow up that close to it. But even if you did and you started thinking about it, it's like, man, yeah, it's just a lot of stuff in there that's hard to understand, that doesn't make sense, that offends our modern sensibilities, and that every generation kind of has to figure out what to do, you know, every generation of Christians. What shall we do with the Old Testament? And I talked about how the story of the Bible is a story. Like, it's not in the sense that it's made up, but in the sense that it's a narrative, right? The overall, it has lots of other things. It has like about a third of the Bible is poetry. But what I'm talking about is the overarching thing is the story, right? With a beginning and a middle and an end, and there's characters and a setting and a plot. And it's not a theological dictionary. It's not a moral handbook. It's not a devotional grab bag. It does give us theological information. It does help us figure out what are the things that God wants us to do that are morally right and wrong, and it does speak to us in a living way, day to day. So all those things, theological dictionary, moral handbook, devotional grab bag, the instinct is right, but it doesn't tell us or give us those things like a reference book or a handbook does. It gives it to us through a story, right? And it's a key thing to remember. And we talked about the beginning of the story last time. And we probably, I think, all know the basic points, and we dove into it a little bit deeper last time. But we all probably, at this point in our Christian walk, know the basic points, right? Of that Genesis 1 through 3. God created the world, and then He created humanity, male and female, as His images, and He wants to rule the world through them in a partnership. And He gave humanity a choice to participate in the terms of this partnership or not. And humanity rebelled and decided that they wanted to rule the world on their own terms. They didn't want God to be part of it. And so that rebellion messed up God's good world. And I talked about 4 areas that use the word fracture, things that got just broken. And it's our relationship with ourselves. This is why condemnation and shame and other things happen, right? Our relationship with God, our relationship with each other, and our relationship with creation. And I mention all those again because it's a lot of times when we're talking about the story, we focus on just when we talk about the benefits of God rescuing this world, and that's the 4th point, or the last point, that God makes this promise about somebody. There's going to be a human coming that's going to kill the evil that's in the world and also be killed by it. And that's what we're left with. But the thing about these fractured relationships with ourselves and with each other and with God and with creation is that when God, if He's going to rescue the world, whatever He's going to do has to fix all those things. And sometimes when we talk to others, especially like somebody that you're kind of witnessing to, or trying to tell them about the good news of Jesus, we really emphasize the benefit of restoring our relationship with God and sometimes with God and with ourselves, right? And that's okay to emphasize those first. It's probably the right thing to emphasize first. But it's not just about that, right? And it's important to mention or to realize that once we start following Jesus, that our relationship with each other is just as broken, and we need to fix that. And God, it's something that we work on in the power of the Holy Spirit, and ultimately our relationship with creation. And The other key point out of all of those points is that God intended to rule the world through humans in a partnership. And that was his original intent. And if you look at the middle and end of the story, turns out that's his continuing intent and his final intent. That part of the story never changes. He's very adamant about doing it through humans and with humans, and that's the only way he's going to do it. So, I do want to start with showing you a picture here. It's not a trick question. What's that a picture of? The earth, yeah, the world, right? Everybody that's grown up in the last few decades recognizes that. Even before we had a satellite that could take that image, we already had that concept from maps and cartographers and stuff like that. Now, what about this? What's that? Yeah. That's also the world, as an ancient Israelite would have thought of it. And you get this from reading Genesis 1, from reading, the Psalms. There's references all over the Bible to this conception, right? Remember, let's start with day 2 of creation, when he said he made the sky, the firmament in the older translations. The word there is like a dome, like something hard. It's where that word is used, rakia. And so there's this dome, this sky dome, and when it says he separated the waters from the waters, and they made expanse in between them, this is what they're picturing. And this is a recent graphic, obviously, but the realization, this is what they're thinking of, I've seen this in books over 100 years ago, maybe more than that, but so there's waters above and waters below, because they're like, something falls down from up there, right? And so, but above that is where God is, right? Because he's somebody that we can't understand, can't really reach, and so the conception is that he's up there somewhere. And you see those little like kind of gaps in the firmament. You see it right over by the sun. You can see it a little more clearly. There's some others, but maybe the lighting, you can't see it so well. But do you see those gaps in the firmament there? Yeah, those are the windows of heaven, right? Have you read scriptures about that's what that's depicting? Anyway, the windows of heaven being opened up and rain falling down or something like that, right? The great deep is the Tehom. When it says that there's this kind of primordial chaotic waters that the Spirit was hovering over. You guys get the picture, right? You see all those there. Sheol is the word for the grave, right? It's the underworld, and it's down there somewhere. So that's what they would recognize. If you said, "What's the world like?" they would maybe draw something like that. Pretty different, huh? So after the Adam and Eve story, the story goes on, and it describes this descent into wickedness of humanity. The Cain and Abel story is first, and it's kind of retelling the taking of the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. It's kind of retelling that story in a different framework between these two brothers. They're replaying that same sin, is what I mean. And actually, that's the place where the word sin first appears in the Bible, when God says sin is crouching at your door, and it's something that is depicted as this beast. And anyway, the Cain and Abel story. Then there's some discussion about what happened after Cain and how his descendants built these cities and all this stuff. And it ends with this this guy named Lamech. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he's the 7th generation, including Adam. And well, here's this poem that he says. He takes 2 wives, starts collecting them like property. Is that the original design? A man shall leave his father and mother, and cleave to his wife, singular. But he's taking 2 wives. And then he says, there's this little poem there in Genesis 4. He says to his wives, listen to my voice. I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech will be avenged 77 times. He's bragging about the fact that you think Cain was bad? I killed somebody just for looking at me wrong. You think Cain had some kind of big punishment? Mine's going to be worse. And that's the depiction that humanity is descending into this and just devolving to this evil world, you know. And then we get in Genesis 5 the genealogy of Seth. It's kind of like Adam 2.0 sort of. And it ends also with a different Lamech who gives birth to somebody named Noah. And the name Noah means rest, because his father Lamech says, I think he's going to give us some relief from all this toil of the ground that God has cursed. Remember Genesis 3, God cursed the ground. Noah's the 10th from Adam. Also, I think, significant. Anyway, so yeah, the final bit on that, and I will say something about this, but not much, is that whole bit about the sons of God and the daughters of humanity, and the Nephilim. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Very, very kind of a cryptic passage in the Bible. And all I'll say about that right now is that there are several, probably 3 that I can think of, legitimate interpretations of what this probably means, and including one that's kind of seems weird to us, but it could mean that. But the thing is, I just want to say, don't get caught up in it. That's what I want to say, right? If you've read the book of Enoch, or if you've watched some of the movies, or read some of the fictional books that have come out lately, or you've heard of them, maybe you haven't read them, you've heard of them. There's a lot of imagination about what it is. Don't get caught up in all that. It's not the main point of the story. It's just the main point of the story, the flow of the story, is that humanity is just getting worse and worse and worse. The book of Enoch and other books like 4th Ezra, one of the Book of Adam, those books were all written in the Second Temple period between Ezra, Nehemiah, and Matthew, right? And it was kind of a fad then of writing a book from the imagination of some other author, some other character, and attributing it to that character, like saying, this is a book of Enoch. It wasn't written by Enoch. Nobody pretended. They only pretended it was written by Enoch, but everybody knew it wasn't written by Enoch. It was written, a long time later. And yeah, the Jews at the time read these things. They thought these are things to it's good literature, but they didn't consider it part of God's word. Just like I would say, man, if you haven't read Mere Christianity, it's really good. But it's not part of God's word. It talks about God's word. It's not part of God's word. Does that make sense? So, I'll leave it there. Okay. So now we're at Noah. So, some little Bible trivia. What's the first time in the Bible that God gets angry? Any guesses? Babylon, I heard. Any other guesses? Angry, you mean like the flood part? Mm-hmm. He has regret. Any other guesses? When Adam and Eve, that's a good guess. Yeah. It's actually in Exodus 4 when Moses is talking to him at the burning bush, where it actually says he gets angry, right? Like you mentioned, Katie, regret is one of the words used in the and we'll get to that, but it doesn't say that he got angry there. The first time in the Bible that it says he got angry was with Noah. And Noah's, that you remember, maybe hopefully you remember the story. Noah sees this bush that's burning, but it's not burning up. So he turns aside and goes, and then the angel of the Lord speaks to him and they're having this dialogue, and Yahweh wants him to go back to the Israelites, and he starts putting up excuses. 5 times he puts up an excuse. He says, I don't know how to talk right. And what's your name anyway? Who am I going to say that? And he puts up all these excuses. The 5th time, he just says, look, God, just send somebody else. like he's running out of excuses. The 5th time, last time, he just says, just send somebody else. And then it says that God was angry. And the next thing he did was say, okay, Aaron is on his way, and he'll be your spokesperson, and he sets up this deal. That's significant. The first time he was angry, what did he do? Did he smack Moses? No, he actually helped him out. Yes, he was angry, but what was his reaction? He said, okay, Aaron is coming, and he'll be your spokesperson. He'll be like your prophet. That's what he did. And my point with all that is that we're going to get into some more, but we need to pay close attention to when God is angry, what he does, and times that he does. Sometimes his judgment and his anger are not always paired in the text, right? Sometimes he's maybe performing some act of judgment, like Adam and Eve in the garden. He says, okay, this is what's going to happen. But he wasn't angry. And other times he's angry, but he doesn't do anything. He didn't do anything to Moses. He actually like gave in. Isn't that something? And there are times that where he's angry. It says he's angry, and then he enact. Sometimes they are paired. I'm not saying that they never are, but we really miss what he's like when we just start kind of combining all those stories in our heads. So here's the verse in the verses in Genesis 6. This is right after the whole description of Lamech and the Nephilim and all this weird stuff going on. And Yahweh saw that the evil of humankind was great upon the earth, and every inclination of the thoughts of his means humankind. His heart is always only evil. It's like putting every word in there, always, only, ever evil. Really stressing that. And Yahweh regretted that he had made humankind on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. What are the emotions we're told that he's experiencing here? Is it anger? No. What are they? Grief and regret. Yeah. And he said, I will destroy humankind to whom I created from upon the face of the earth, from humankind to animals to the creeping things to the birds of heavens, right? It's not just mankind, it's the land animals and the sky animals. For I regret that I have made them but Noah. Thank goodness for the but Noah times. He found favor. So let's look at this a little more closely in the next passage that he. This is a little bit later. So first, in verse 5-8, God says that, and then he starts telling Noah how to build the ark and all this stuff, and then the passage goes back to talking about this. The earth was corrupted before God and was filled with violence, and that God looked on the earth, and look, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now look, I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. And I highlighted those 4 words, corrupted and corrupt 3 times, and destroy is the 4th one, because they're all the same root word, but they're all the same root word is the best way I'll say it. And the thing is, the translators chose corrupt for the first 3, and that doesn't really fit for the 4th one. I'm going to corrupt them along with the earth. So they had to pick another word. I'm going to destroy. But there is a word that fits into all 4 cases, and I think helps us understand what's going on. The word is ruined. That's the meaning of the underlying word. Corrupt and destroy are also ways to translate it. All 3 of those are legitimate ways to translate it. But if I put ruin in there, you can see the connection that the biblical author is making. He's saying the earth was ruined because it's filled with violence, and it repeats that God looks at the land and it's ruined, and all flesh had ruined its way on the earth, and that so God says, now I'm going to ruin them along with the earth. So it's like the thing that they're already doing to the earth, he's going to just accelerate it. They're already ruining everything, and God is seeing where this is headed. He says, I'm just gonna accelerate this right now. They're just trashing the place, and they're ruining everything. Everything they touch and everything they do is just creating ruin in my good world. And this is on a quick highway to nowhere, and I'm just going to accelerate this and just complete. I'm going to make that ruination, instead of it dragging out, I'm just going to do it all at once. And ruin them along with the earth. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. Does this make sense so far? This is not made up by me. This is the scholarly study from people way smarter than me, who have actual degrees in this sort of thing. And understand all the underlying languages. So I'd say that just in case you've never heard some of this and you're kind of like, okay. So and I am going somewhere with all of this, so just stick with me, right? So that's what's going on in this verse, and so these are the beginning and the end of the flood. Those two sets of verses, the top one and the bottom one. The 600th year, it gives the exact time. The springs of the great deep were split open, and the windows of heaven were open, and rain came upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. What's going on there in light of that picture? I gave you a hint. What's going on there? Yeah, he let all the water, it's a decreation. Things are collapsing back right? On day 2, he split the waters. Now what's happening? It's all coming back. The waters below are coming up. The waters above are coming down. It's collapsing back into itself. That's the depiction. It's a decreation type of moment, right? God said, I'm going to just complete this ruin. It's grieving me and hurting me to see this drag out. I'm just going to finish it right now and start over with Noah. That's what he's doing. And it's not out of anger, it's out of grief. And then that's in chapter 7. Chapter 8, a long time later, it describes, what happened when this starts to end, right? It rains all this time. It fills up the whole planet. We get a description of like how high things go, like, I forget what it was, 30 feet, 50 feet above the tallest mountain, expressed in cubits, of course. And that's it. And then one day, God remembers Noah. He's floating there on the boat all by himself, and he caused a wind to blow over the earth, and the water subsided, and the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven. So the two things that were open now get closed. And they're restrained, right? Genesis 1, that's what God do. There's chaos. The Spirit is hovering over the surface of the deep, and then God starts to speak, and he starts to order and restrain this chaos. So this is the recreation moment. Does anybody know what the word for wind is in Hebrew? You would say it. Ruach. Does anybody know what the word for spirit is in Hebrew? Ruach, same word. God caused a ruach to blow over the earth. These are the hyperlinks. This is how the Bible works. It's a hyperlink to Genesis 1:2. And the ruach of God was hovering over the surface of the deep. So there's this recreation moment. So I want to read to you, it's a little long, but it's not too long. A scholar, Daniel Hawk, wrote a book called The Violence of the Biblical God, and here's a quote from that book about this. The introduction to the flood story suggests that God has seen where the ruination of creation is headed and has decided to accelerate the process to its completion. The plain sense of the Hebrew text conveys something very different from most English translations, right? English says corrupt and then destroy, but the plain sense of the Hebrew text conveys something different, which is perhaps, but the English translations are perhaps influenced by a view of an angry, punitive, which means punishing, deity. Right? So he's saying the plain sense of the Hebrew language shows us what's going on, but the English translations, maybe they were influenced by a view of an angry God, an angry, punishing God. He goes on, the flood was an ancient symbol of destruction and disorder, and so it's a fitting medium for the dissolution of creation. It gets overwhelmed. Every boundary gets overwhelmed, and creation returns to a primordial deep that existed before God spoke the boundaries into being. We're left with the sense that God is not so much sending the flood to punish the world as much as facilitating, through the flood, the inevitable descent into chaos caused by human destructiveness and violence. God ruins an already ruined creation. In so doing, he creates the conditions for a reordering and a renewal to take place. God ruins an already ruined creation, and when he does that, he creates the conditions for a reordering and a renewal to take place. He didn't just get angry and decide, that's it, I've had it with y'all, I'm wrecking this place. He didn't just fly off the handle. He was grieved. He saw where this was headed. And have you ever felt that? You see something get ruined and you just feel like, I can't stand to just see this thing that I love get further messed up. I'd rather just torch it right now or turn away, whatever you can do to separate yourself from. Have you ever experienced something like that? Or known someone who has? It's not super common experience, but I think you probably identify with that feeling of, man, I really love that, and now it's got a scratch on it. It's never going to be the same again. Or now it has 10 scratches on it, or now it's whatever, it's been torn, and I can't stand to see it like that. I'd rather just throw it in the trash. That sort of thing. And so that's what's happening here. God is grieved, and he's like, these guys are already trashing the place, and let's just finish. But it was always with the purpose of renewal and restoration. It wasn't just, that's it, dissolve into nothingness and then that's it, because Noah found favor in his eyes. There's a pattern there too in the Bible that when God does this sort of thing, it's always towards renewal and restoration. So, after the land dries up, Noah does the thing where he sends out the raven, and then he sends out a dove, and then he sends out a dove again, and then he sends out a dove a third time, and it's by then it's completely gone, right? It doesn't come back. And then he comes out of the ark eventually, and it says that he built an altar, and he took some of the animals that they had. They weren't all 2 by 2. There were some that were 7 by 7. The animals, the clean animals that you could sacrifice, 7 pairs came in. So he had some left over. He didn't kill like the last, European bison or something for this sacrifice, right? Anyway, it says that Yahweh smelled the soothing fragrance, and he says to himself, he says, I never again will I curse the ground for the sake of humankind, because the inclination of humankind is evil from his youth. And I'm never gonna destroy everything again. As long as the earth endures, seed and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will not cease. What are these things? These are the regular rhythm of the world, right? Instead of chaos, it's order. And order is not going to cease for the rest of, as long as the earth endures. That's what he's saying to himself. But what's weird is the reason. Remember what God said earlier? Verse 5 there. Every inclination, the second line, every inclination of the thoughts of humankind's heart is always only evil. So he that's why he has regret. And what does he say here at the end of it? The inclination of the heart of humankind is evil from his youth. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. And God says, since nothing's changed, I'm just going to have to keep destroying this place every so often. Wait, no, he didn't say that. Did he say, well, maybe Noah? I bet Noah's kids. Noah's a good guy. He's found favor in my sight. So I bet Noah's kids are all going to turn out great, and so I won't have to destroy the world again. No, he's not that naive. He said this is not going to change in mankind's heart. And so I'm not going to do this again. It's a twist, a surprising twist. Nothing's changed, but he decided he's not going to do it again. And this also begins a pattern in the Bible of when we start screwing up, God doubles down. He brings us in closer. He commits himself more. He starts making bigger promises. He just starts going, okay, I see you guys are not doing anything that I asked you to do. So I'll make you a promise. And that's the portrait of God in the Bible. And this is the first mention of this sort of thing. Turn to Genesis 9. Or flip to or turn on your Bible to Genesis 9. And I just want you to kind of follow along because it helps. But follow and listen because, we're probably not all reading the same translation. And it's too much to put up on the slides. But this is after Noah and them all come out of the boat and stuff, and after what we just read. This is the promise. Because earlier here, he's just saying it to himself. I'm never going to do this again. But here in chapter 9 is where he says it to Noah and to us. Verse 7. You guys there? Okay. At least one person is. The rest of you will have to catch up if you're not. Verse 7, and you, be fruitful and multiply, swarm on the earth and multiply in it. What's that a hyperlink to? The garden, Genesis 1, right? He's talking to Noah and his sons. You, be fruitful and multiply, swarm on the earth and multiply in it. And God said to Noah and his sons with him, as for me, look, I am establishing my covenant. First time the word covenant appears in the Bible. With you and with your seed after you, your offspring. And with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and every animal of the earth, with you. From all that came out of the ark to all the animals of the earth. I'm establishing my covenant with you, that never again will all flesh be cut off from the waters of a flood, by the waters of a flood. Nor will there ever be a flood that ruins, it's that same word, destroys, ruins the earth. Verse 12, and God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I'm making between you and between every living creature that is with you for future generations. My bow I have set in the clouds, and it shall be for a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And when I make clouds appear over the earth, the bow shall be seen in the clouds. Then I will remember my covenant that is between me and you, and between every living creature with all flesh. And the waters of a flood will never again cause the destruction, again, that's the word ruin. It will never be the ruin of all flesh. Verse 16, the bow shall be in the clouds, and I will see it, so as to remember the everlasting covenant between God and between every living creature with all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I am establishing between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. Do you think God really wants us to get the point there? Like, how many times did they say that? The covenant is between God and who? This is a participatory sermon. God and who? Humankind. Who else? All creatures, yeah. The animals, the birds, everybody. All creatures. All nephesh. All beings. And he says, I'm never going to destroy it again. And this is the first time the word covenant appears. We'll talk more about covenants later when we talk about Abraham. But a covenant is essentially a partnership where there's things I'm going to do and things that you're going to do in this partnership. And if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, there's consequences for you. And if I don't hold up the end of the bargain, there's consequences for me. And at its basic level, that's what a covenant is. Now, let's look at the terms of this covenant. What God's required to do and what the humans are required to do to fulfill this partnership. I didn't forget. This is not an unfinished slide. There are no obligations for humankind. A completely one-sided promise that God made because humankind was evil. And he said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to make your promise right now, one-sided completely. I'm just never going to destroy you guys again, no matter how bad it gets." It's powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. He didn't make this promise because he'd spent his wrath and he thought humans could be better next time, like he's exhausted his anger. It just illustrates what I said before, that this begins a pattern of, well, it's probably the second thing in the pattern, because he does it in Genesis 3 too, when he makes the promise of the seed of the woman. And when we start messing up, he makes more promises. He binds himself closer to us. He puts himself in more hot water. So that's the Genesis, the flood story. And so here's the takeaway, right? God's huge commitment to rescuing us with no strings attached. And so what I want to ask you from this is just about your view of God, especially God in the Old Testament. So just think about that. Right? Does he seem like mostly angry, mostly sad, mostly strict? He doesn't like evil. Mostly grieved? Yeah. What is the Bible's depiction like? We've already looked at Moses, we've looked at the flood story, and I've given you a preview already that if you start studying where God gets angry and what he does, and then other times that he does something seems drastic to us, but whether he was angry or not, we tend to, we hear all these stories those of us that grow up in church hear all these stories as kids, or you hear other people talk about it, and they always kind of mixed up in our heads. This is, I think, how it happens. And then you just come away with this image of, the Old Testament God is he's just an angry guy, like nobody's good enough. And he's always everybody's always getting smacked for not being good enough. But here, God makes a covenant just completely on his own. Nobody's asking for anything. Noah wasn't saying, "Lord, please don't do this again." He just all of a sudden just up and decides he's not going to do that again. And the thing is, like I said earlier, God's anger is not always paired with his judgment. And his anger is expressed in slow, measured, restorative ways. Okay? Usually, the ones he gets the most angry at are his covenant people. Like, they know better. And he's done a lot more for them. Like, people that you're in closer relationship with, you expect more of them, right? And he's done a lot for Israel. And so he gets more angry with them than with Edom or the Midianites or any of those other ites. In fact, Exodus 34, 6 and 7 is the first kind of condensed, kind of largish description that God gives of himself. And Exodus 34, 6 to 7 is the most quoted and alluded to verses in the Bible, where other authors in the Bible are referring back to that. Sometimes larger chunks of it, sometimes, first half, second half, the middle, whatever. It's the part where it says that he's compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in loyal love and faithfulness. And slow to anger. That's, yes, he does get angry. It's not always paired with judgment, but his anger is measured, and it takes a while for him to get angry. Think of all the excuses that Moses was making. And it was finally when he couldn't even come up with something good, he just said, "I don't want to do it." That's the depiction of God's anger and judgment in the Old Testament. Anger can be a good thing when it's directed towards injustice, right? Like, if God sees you suffering unjustly and doesn't get angry about it, is that a loving thing to do? Is that the kind of best friend you would want? Who's somebody who sees your suffering and is just apathetic about it? Just kind of, you'll figure it out. Like, is that what you want out of a relationship? I heard an emphatic no there. Me either. What's your view of the God of the Old Testament? Is your view being challenged by what we've talked about today? I think that the thing with God's anger is that we think of ourselves. That's why we have a problem with it, right? I know that I've gotten angry and overreacted. And I think we wonder if God's doing that. And it's a lot more serious when an all-powerful being overreacts. I could overreact and wreck a car. What happens when the creator of the universe overreacts if it's possible for him to do that? I think that's what we're, at a deep level, I think that's one of the things we're struggling with. And maybe we never thought of it in those terms, or maybe we don't want to admit it. But, yeah. When we see ourselves or see others getting angry over things that we think they shouldn't be getting angry about, that don't warrant that kind of response, right? So what I want to challenge you with from these passages is to reframe your view of God in the Old Testament, starting with his expression of anger and other emotions, strong emotions. To look carefully and think carefully when you're reading and you see God does this or God does that. Why was it? What's his motivation? What was the outcome? Right? Did he just fly off the handle? Or was it well-deserved? What would you have done in that situation? The times where God has every right to do something, like with Moses, but he doesn't. He just gives in. Says, okay, I'm mad, so I'm just going to give in. There's some twists and turns there when you start looking at it, and that's what I want to challenge you with. God's anger is always measured. It's always slow. And it always has an objective, an end result of restoration. And one thing that you have to kind of make a switch and between, the thing is, Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, right? But I don't know if anybody will cop to this, but I'm convinced that all of us, myself included, to some level, are struggling to connect Jesus in the New Testament with the God of the Old Testament. And we have this idea that we're either used to have or we're coming out of, or it's kind of reflected in the way we talk of, God hates me and wants to kill me, but instead of killing me, he killed Jesus so he didn't have to kill me. And that's not the depiction of the God of the Old Testament. Just from reading the Old Testament carefully. And then you add Jesus' physical embodiment of what God is like. And it's definitely not that. So a while back I started thinking about, okay, every time I see like God, or the Lord Yahweh in the Old Testament, put the word Jesus in there. And Jesus was grieved and regretted having created the world. Jesus was angry at Moses, so he said, fine, I'll give you Aaron. Right? And then in the New Testament, where you see Jesus put Yahweh in there or something like that. If you put God or the Father, I don't know, that might not be, for me, that wasn't enough to to startle my mind into seeing it. Sometimes you got to do something like startling to see it from a new angle. And that might be different for you, but for me it was, put Yahweh in there. How Yahweh says to the rich young ruler, you should give away all your possessions. And then he was sad because he loved him very much when he wouldn't do it. It was Yahweh who multiplied the bread and the fishes. It was Yahweh who said to the woman caught in adultery, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Your mileage may vary, but I encourage you to think of ways and to just reframe these passages and views of God in the Old Testament. That's my challenge for you. All right?